There's not huge differences between communications and grant development. You've got to know your audience. You've got to write for your audience. You've got to convince your audience in an engaging way.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. This week my guest is Research Facilitator Charlotte Stephenson, who is based in the Leeds University Business School. Despite a brief spell as an Anglo-Saxon, and make sure you check the show notes for a picture, Charlotte first came into the research adjacent world to focus on communications. But she soon found that these skills could directly translate from writing blogs into writing funding applications. So Charlotte now helps people to develop research funding applications, describing herself as a human signpost. She particularly supports those who might be going through the process for the first time with support and mentoring. Keen to address inequalities and barriers to accessing research funding, she has also been doing some research of her own around this topic, and you'll find links to the roadmap that she discusses in the show notes. Charlotte was nominated for this podcast by colleague Hannah Preston. In nominating her, Hannah said, "One of the things that impresses me most about Charlotte is her ability to connect people, retain information and spot opportunities. Sounds like the perfect skill set for a human signpost to me." Listen on to hear Charlotte's story. Welcome along to the podcast, Charlotte. It's so lovely to have you here.
Lovely to be here. Thank you very much for the invite.
So I wonder if we could begin with you telling us a bit about what it is that you do.
Absolutely. So I am a research facilitator, which is a title that maybe isn't used across all institutions, but essentially what that means is, although I have multiple facets to my role, I mainly support those who are developing external funding applications, so research funding applications. So it can be anywhere from idea generation and development, finding collaborators, finding the right funding call, and then, the nitty-gritty of developing and drafting the eventual application. So I do this at Leeds University Business School, and I work with a fantastic team of people in the research office there. And as is the case with most people who are research adjacent, we work with people across the faculty, across the university. So it's great. I get to work with lots of different skill sets and lots of different people to ensure that our researchers and our colleagues who want to conduct research have as much support and timely support and well-placed support as possible to deliver the fantastic research that they do.
Fantastic. And I'm sure that help makes a massive difference. It's interesting, your job title. So you're research facilitator. When you describe your role there, that sounds very similar to what other universities would maybe call something like a research development role. Is there a story behind the name there? I'm always very interested in how we decide what things are called.
Yeah. So it probably reflects the structure at the University of Leeds. So we're a big institution and we have centralised support mechanisms and local level support mechanisms. So you're absolutely right. We have a fantastic research and innovation service, and they have research and innovation development managers positioned there that are kind of allocated or support particular faculties or subjects or specialisms. So there is a team of brilliant research development managers there. However, the business school noticed a little bit of a gap maybe in the market, and they were looking to fill this in line with what is offered centrally, around the fact that in social sciences and humanities, and I'm sure in other subjects as well, there's sometimes not the same drive to obtain external research funding as there maybe is when you look at STEM subjects, medicine and health, things like this. The requirements, exotic field work or technical lab equipment or things like this maybe isn't there. It's people and yes, data sets and software and technology, but usually these can be sourced at a reasonably low cost, if no cost at all. So the business school felt that particularly for early career researchers, but indeed anyone through that career pipeline, who maybe hadn't engaged with research funding, but wanted to, didn't have a dedicated person to go to in the faculty to really ask those questions that maybe they'd be embarrassed to ask a manager or a mentor. Nobody should feel embarrassed, but we all do. So I was supposed to be the go-to person for maybe people who aren't as familiar with the research funding landscape, and I could do a little bit more of, sort of one-to-one kind of coaching and support through that process, and really be a human signpost, and at the right times just direct them to colleagues in HR, in finance, the pre-award team. It could be any questions that they have to then think about when it comes to research funding and a funding application. But I was their one-stop shop for those answers and more support. So yes, you're right. A lot of what I do does probably mirror that of a research development manager. But it's much more sort of localized, and really for perhaps those who are coming to this completely new, completely fresh, maybe including people who have moved to the UK and are used to maybe European funding or international funding, but funding is quite a complex beast as it is as I'm sure in many other places. So just navigating that as well, and being that hopefully friendly person to just check in with and talk to. So research facilitator, I suppose it's similar, localized for us in the business school.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I love the idea of a sort of friendly face, because certainly in some places I've worked, the research office or whatever it's called can feel very separate to the research on the ground. So having that connection there, I think would be really helpful. And I think research facilitator, it does sound like a less intimidating job title. There's sort of a friendlier sense to it. That feeling that you're there to help get the research up and running. Yeah, I'd like to think so. Yeah. Excellent. So how did you get into doing this job? What's been your journey?
Well, so a bit like when I've listened to others on your podcast and spoken to people who are in similar roles, there's not one route into being in a research adjacent role. There's lots of different ways, aren't there? And I'm certainly one of these people who went to university, loved university, thought, yes, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to do a PhD. So I did. I did my undergraduate at the University of Leeds, actually. So I've come full circle. I then did my postgraduate at the University of Hull and had a fantastic time over there. And wasn't in a business discipline, although I'm based in a business school now. I actually have a PhD in paleontology, which all of my friends adore the comparison. Me and Ross from Friends. It's a good talking point to be
I bet. Yeah.
A doctor of dinosaurs, although if anyone is listening who knows anything about my PhD, they'll know it wasn't as exotic as dinosaurs. It was paleobotany. It was plants, fossilized plants, and I loved it.
Do you know the research adjacent world is full of ex-plant scientists? I can't tell you how many. We're all here because that's what I was, a plant biochemist, and previous other guests, lots of plant scientists there as well. So yeah,
maybe there's a study in that.
Maybe there is.
But yes, so I completed my PhD, and it probably got to about the second year, and it was brilliant. I had excellent supervisors. I had wonderful opportunities. But I just started to realize that research wasn't for me. I love the environment, but actually sitting, in a lab all day, for me, staring at rocks all day was a little bit isolating, a little bit lonely. And I kind of wanted a profession that had a little bit more daily engagement with people, teams, whoever it might be. And the thing I loved the most was learning and hearing about what other people were doing, and then telling other people about that and saying, I had this fascinating conversation with someone and they told me ABC. And, I was just kind of spreading the news of whatever I heard. And so a friend of mine actually said, how about research communications and thinking about sharing others' knowledge, but still being in that educational environment? And I thought it was a brilliant idea. So I had a look around to see what opportunities were available. And I got involved with The Conversation, the sort of online publishing sort of journalism platform. So I wrote a few articles for The Conversation, which was really good fun. And from that, I got talking to other authors of the conversation who were based at the University of Hull at the time as well. And they were a really good group. And we got together and worked with some colleagues who organised the Manchester Science Festival years ago now. And we were invited to write a book in 24 hours as part of the Science Festival. And it was on the theme of light and colour. So there was all different, a physicist there, a chemist there. I was there with my paleontology hat on. So it was brilliant. And we all sat in a room as part of Manchester Science Festival. And people who came to the festival could walk around and watch us write and work. It was really strange, but kind of exciting. And then at times we were there sat with a takeaway in the middle of the night, frantically typing away. And there were some illustrators there as well that were commissioned to draw sort of what we were doing as we were going as well, which was fantastic. And they're incorporated into the book. So I then got into research communications. My scholarship funding for my PhD ran out. So again, what's often the case, you scramble to find a job anywhere, which resulted in me dressing up as an Anglo-Saxon, working for Leeds City Council. I was part of an educational team there and did all sorts of school trips. So that was quite unusual. And then a job came up at Leeds University Business School in the research office. The role was a research support officer, but it was mainly focusing on communicating the research activities of the faculty. So we have a blog and all sorts of other platforms. So it was to work on the comms aspect, particularly for research. It was just a maternity cover. So I thought, right, well, I don't know if they'll want me, but if they do, I'd love to give it a go. And it's a year, it's worth trying out. And that was back in 2017. And I must have done okay, because whoever I was covering for, who is now a very, very good friend, actually the person who put me forward for this podcast, she returned and the faculty decided to keep me on and find ways that I could engage more in the faculty, and zoom forward to now. And here I am, a research facilitator. So there was a bit of a shift during the pandemic. I'm sure for a lot of people, it was, well, myself included, it was a very busy time, chaotic time, stressful time, personally and professionally. But professionally, there was the UKRI Rapid Response Funding Call that came out, which lots and lots of people were interested in. It was a very popular funding call. And we found in the business school that we almost didn't have the capacity to support everyone who was wanting to engage with that call. So that's really when my role shifted from communications and supporting with all sorts of other bits to do with the research pipeline into more of that grant development role. There was a gap, they needed all hands on deck to support with that. And I had the support of our Pro Dean for Research and Innovation, so our head in the faculty of research, and they could see I had the kind of skill set to support with grant development. There's not huge differences between communications and grant development. You've got to know your audience, you've got to write for your audience, you've got to convince your audience in an engaging way. So they brought me in. I supported lots of people with their applications to that call. And as a result, I worked with my manager and we sort of rejigged my role. So it was much more primarily about supporting those applying for funding applications. And here I am.
Oh, excellent. Oh, there's a couple of follow-up questions I want to ask. The first thing is, does the science book exist anywhere? Could people go and read it or see it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I haven't looked on online marketplaces or Waterstones or anything like that. I do have a copy on my shelf, and you could previously buy it. I don't know if it's still in print, but if it is, I can share.
I think we'll need to get a link for that and put it in the show notes. And also, are there any pictures of the Anglo-Saxon costume?
Oh, good question. There must be somewhere. Dig some out. Yeah, and I had to carry a proper sword and shield as well, which was kind of daunting, around 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, and I'm there carrying a full-size sword. So
Yeah.
no health and safety disasters. Everyone was fine.
Excellent. Oh, brilliant. Oh, well, yeah, that'd be great to see if there are any of those. To come to a more sensible question, though, I loved your point that of the similarities between research communications, grant development. And one of the things that I'm really interested in, one of the reasons I started this podcast, is to show where these threads go across different types of research adjacent jobs. So where people might think, oh, I do public engagement or science communication, that's my thing. But actually there's that thread that could take you through, because it's still, as you say, writing, getting your point across, being clear, being convincing. Yeah. So have you found those skills translated really nicely across?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. The research communications role definitely gave me an insight into the research that goes on in business schools. First of all, I'd come from a very different background, and I was frantically getting my head around macroeconomics and behavioral science and, international business and marketing, all sorts of other areas. So being able to sit there with researchers and academic colleagues to understand and hear more about their research and try and think about ways that I could articulate that to either a broad audience or an identified target audience. If we're looking at engaging with a particular sort of community or business sector, whatever it might be, really thinking about how to translate that, finding that activity in a way that's the most engaging was a brilliant introduction to research support, research communications. So yeah, working with academics, hearing what they do, reading their journal articles, and then looking to translate them in a written way as well, just gave me a sense of what's needed to convey the really sort of salient key points, keeping the reader's attention and really showcasing what excellent research happens, of course, for me in the business school, but happens up and down the country and internationally. It's fascinating to read, but you're absolutely right. There are real synergies between research communications and grant development work. One of the most common things that I provide in my feedback to those who've drafted applications is to just take a step back and read your application as though you're listening to BBC News or something on the telly, and think about the language that's used there. They're still conveying really technical points. It can be very emotive as well, the content, but it's translated in a way that engages with a broader public and really draws you in. And I don't like to say sells the story, because that makes it feel far more like a business transaction, but really puts the story across in a way that's, engaging, relatable, and just exciting. I think we have to remember that research is fantastic, and it shouldn't be dry and full of complex language and lengthy paragraphs. It should engage a huge variety of people in our community, and just getting the opportunity to help people on that journey to sharing their research with others, whether it be through a blog or now through funding applications, is real privilege.
Yeah, fantastic. I think the idea of your funding application goes off, it goes off to a panel, and that panel are not going to be experts in your little niche subject. So, you can assume a certain level of knowledge, but you really don't have much of an opportunity to get that great idea across. So it's so important to choose the right words. Fantastic. Oh, well, I'm sure in all of these things that you've told us about that you've been working on, there are some things in there that you're really proud of. I wonder if maybe there's a couple of examples you'd like to share.
Yeah, well, actually, it's on a slight tangent, but as with research, it's all related. But I very recently stepped over to the other side from research adjacent. I am also now conducting my own research projects as well. So I see it from both sides. I'm almost practicing what I preach. So it was late last year, so December 2022, there was a funding call announced that was issued through the University of Leeds, but it was the Research England Enhancing Research Culture funding that had been allocated. And I spoke to colleagues in the team, And we felt that we had a really strong project idea about looking at improving the research culture, primarily through addressing inequality in the research funding landscape. Now, of course, there's a huge amount being done at a national level on this and a sort of local level. The University of Leeds has a fantastic research culture team, and it's recently launched its research culture strategy, which is brilliant. But we also felt that in the business school, we could do something really tailored to our community. And so I led a team to put together an application for this funding call. We were successful. And so, yeah, for the last almost 12 months now, we've been working this research culture project, interviewing colleagues in the faculty, conducting questionnaires, doing some real deep dives into the data to understand more about what the research funding landscape is like for members of our faculty and our community, who's applying, who's not applying, why are they applying, why are they not applying, understanding those kind of enablers and barriers. And then, you know, we're perfectly positioned in the research office to then try and address some of those barriers and showcase more of the enablers and the support and make sure that everyone can engage with those things. And when there are gaps, we can look to address them and put in place practices and interventions that can support more people engaging with the research funding landscape. So yeah, I'm proud of a lot in my role, but recently, I would say, yeah, the research culture projects have been a way for me to evidence that I can write a strong funding application. It's always good. That's a tricky thing sometimes. I've kind of weaved through different roles. I completely understand why sometimes colleagues go, well, why should I trust their opinion? You know, I don't have the length of qualification background that they might want to see if they want to, you know, get someone with real research funding development expertise. But I have developed it through my working with others and supporting colleagues and carefully reading the guidelines, as we all have to do. So this was a really nice way to say, look, I can write a strong application. I have received the funding, and now as a result, I can hopefully ensure the research environment is as supportive and engaging for as many as possible. So yeah, it's been great, actually.
Sounds brilliant. Congratulations. And are there any things you've noticed coming out yet that you're able to share? I understand if it's all still in the works, but
yeah, so there's a lot of analysis still ongoing, absolutely. So we did receive a second round of funding, which is why I'm still working on the project, even though it was funded sort of quite a while ago. So we have broadened out the scope to look actually at inequalities in engagement with things like research communications and training and development as well. So we're covering more than just research funding. But yes, there's things that I expect many institutions and research establishments are looking at in terms of the inequalities around gender, around ethnicity, disability. There's been a real focus on those with caring responsibilities as well. A huge proportion of our community have caring responsibilities, and just keeping in mind when we're developing processes, policies, putting in place deadlines, that we need to be mindful of the competing demands of many in our community, and we don't want anything we put in place to unfairly support or unfairly disadvantage members of the community. So I'd say what is an exciting or a nice finding from the research is that whilst a lot of the national analysis has found that there is a discrepancy when you look at gender in terms of male and female applicants and award holders for research funding, our data shows that actually we have a real balance in terms of both women and men applying for research funding in the business school. But we're wanting now to dig a little bit deeper. So yes, at surface level, you look at the composition of our community and you look at the composition of who applies and who's awarded funding, and they reflect each other reasonably well. But then when you drill down to say the size of the award that's being applied for, you start to notice there becomes a little bit of a divide. So it's something that we're looking into a lot more. But yes, there's so much that you can look at in terms of the data. We've had some fantastic conversations. As I say, we interviewed several colleagues as part of the project, and that's really key. The data alone is useful, but we need to hear from the people who are working in our community and what works for them and what doesn't work for them, and really listen to what doesn't work and address that. Make sure that we change things where we possibly can to make things better, because if we can improve things at a local level, hopefully that will ripple out, just as what's being done at a national and institutional level will have that impact locally. So a brilliant project, and we have developed actually a roadmap. We launched it a couple of weeks ago, and it's, as the name suggests, it is a visual guide, but it is a roadmap through the funding sort of development process, as I mentioned before, from idea generation, collaborators finding the right call, all the way through to revising and eventually submitting your application. In that roadmap, it captures the discussions that we had about the enablers and barriers. We won't be able to eradicate all the barriers, but if people are aware of them and aware of the support that's in place to help them overcome those barriers, hopefully more people will feel better informed and be able to engage with the research funding. So we've just launched that roadmap. We've had a really good level of feedback so far. People are really keen to use it. It links to all sorts of resources and has sort of best practice guides. So really hoping that will make a real difference to members of the community.
That sounds like it's going to be a really valuable resource. Excellent. We've heard about good things, but as always on this podcast, I like to invite people to share maybe something that's been challenging for them as well. Is there something you'd like to share?
I suppose what I mentioned briefly here about having to sort of repeatedly demonstrate my expertise when it comes to funding development. It's a tricky one to prove on paper, apart from taking the time to work with people, those who are willing to work with you, to hopefully then be able to evidence the successes that come from that collaborative working. But something like that doesn't happen overnight. It takes a willingness of the applicants, as well as me spending the time with them to get to know them and their project, and really working closely together. And it's been really fantastic when that has worked, but there's always some resistance, or, as is always the case with deadlines, people are frantically working towards a deadline and they probably don't want another voice in the mix. So sometimes people can see it as a little bit of a barrier to engaging in even more support, which hopefully we're trying to overcome and evidence the benefits. But I would say trying to prove that I do know what I'm talking about. Many people in the faculty and the wider university do absolutely see, and I'm very grateful for that. And they've been a real advocate for me and other members of the team. But yes, it's just always those last few that I really want to sort of say, please trust me, let me work with you. It will be for the benefit of your research and your project. And then I'd say the only other thing, which is on a personal level, but again, linking back to the pandemic, in one way, the pandemic was a real positive shift for me in terms of my career and what I was able to achieve with the support of my manager and others. But it was also really tough for me personally. Lots of loss, lots of isolation, and I'm still feeling the effects of that, as we are today. So it's that difficult double-edged sword of, the pandemic gave me something, the pandemic also took away a lot. And so it did result in me changing my working pattern. So I used to be full-time. I'm now down to 4 days a week. Again, I've had a huge amount of support in being able to adapt my working week and my role and responsibilities to do that. But it's difficult. I've never had to sort of drop down working hours before. I've either done my PhD or worked full time. So it's a real adjustment for me, that kind of balancing workload and responsibilities. So I'd say that's something that I'm still finding challenging every now and again, but I'm getting much better at it. The work-life balance is certainly improved.
I think that's something in my experience that's just an ongoing, lifelong thing. As soon as you get the more responsibilities, more caring responsibilities, just life, just everything. Yeah. And certainly I've had similar experience of, stepping up, stepping down, stepping sideways, just depending on what was going on in my life, not just what was going on professionally. So yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that though. Yeah, I think it's important that we don't always just share the positive stuff, but the other things that are going on in the background as well. Thank you. And I always like to ask my guests, my favorite question, if you had a magic wand, so if time, money, physics were no object, what would you like to change about the world that you work in?
Good question. I worry my answer could be quite boring, actually. But I think the first thing that came to my mind when you said that was to eradicate deadlines.
Oh,
which, of course, would be an impossibility. But imagine a world where we could work at our own pace, do what we wanted to do, not fear the dreaded 5 p.m. Friday deadline or, whatever it might be. I think, yes, an eradication of deadlines would be heavenly.
I think I'm sort of on the fence with this one. Normally I say to my guests, yes, that sounds like a fantastic idea. I'm like, on the one hand, yeah, the pressure of that. On the other hand, I'm the kind of person who, if I didn't have a deadline, nothing would ever happen. It would just drift on and on forever. So yeah, I can see though that even just like rolling deadlines or something, but not having that pressure of this is your one and only chance to get this thing. Yeah,
I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, a little bit of pressure, like you say, is good for everyone. It gets work done. I appreciate that, but I think, yeah, taking away the stress of that real finite, it has to be this particular minute on this particular day. Yeah, if it could be rolling deadlines or just when the deadline's coming and it's regular or staggered deadlines. I don't know what it could be, but just, the thing that immediately came into my mind was, imagine a world where there was no deadline for outside of work as well. Just, no deadlines for anything. It would be carnage, I'm sure. If I just run it would be awful.
Do it for like a week and then be like, maybe not. No, I think some as well, like some funding schemes as well. I've always, you can only apply once. And these are some of the real life changing, the ECR fellowships and things like that. It's like you've got one chance. The pressure that goes along with that is unbelievable. So yeah, I can definitely see a bit of loosening up.
Maybe we compromise. Absolutely. Just more flexible deadlines.
Yeah. And not all of them coming at the same time. That's always something, isn't
absolutely. It? Yeah, absolutely.
So just a couple of things to wrap up our conversation. If you had one piece of advice that you would give to anybody thinking of following in your footsteps, what would it be?
Give it a go.
Yeah.
I'd say be open to learning from others. Be willing to sign up to all sorts of training. Even if you're not quite sure it'll be relevant, one day you will find that little bit of knowledge is just the bit of information you need. So yeah, someone who is willing to get involved in all sorts, learn from others, and who just really loves research, who loves to learn, who loves to hear what other people are up to. But if people are wanting to get involved in the sort of research adjacent world, I've never looked back. So I would say go for it. What's the worst that can happen?
Oh, brilliant advice. Thank you so much. And if anybody would like to reach out to you, where's the best place to find you? Where do you hang out online?
I would say at the moment, the best way is probably to email me, which is very archaic, isn't it? But I do have a Twitter handle or an X handle. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to say now. And I am on LinkedIn, but I'm not the best at checking, which is terrible considering my previous hat is research communications. But I've taken a little step back. So I would say LinkedIn, I will eventually look, but apologize for any delay. Email, I'm there all the time, but Twitter at the moment, although I exist on Twitter, I've not checked it for months, so avoid Twitter.
Okay, fair enough. We'll get those links and we'll put them in the show notes. So just mean to say thank you so much for taking the time to come along and have a chat. It's been lovely to meet you.
Thank you ever so much for having me. It's been a wonderful discussion, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links under the episode to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the Research Adjacent Roundup newsletter. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.